Okay, Professor, the first question has to do with this separation.
Call me Alastair, okay?
Alastair, okay. The first question, Alastair, has to do with this separation and distinction between theory and practice, or applied studies. In Brazil, we have this idea that it happened to be a disaster, in the sense that this separation created a huge abysm between social studies and the society, those we work with. What do you think of this?
Yeah, no, I agree. I was interested you said a disaster, and I thought maybe that's too strong, but yeah, it's been a big problem, right? And I'm interested. We seem to be at a point now, and I don't know. It's maybe stuff that's happening in Australia, that we kind of struggled with this divide of linguistics, applied linguistics, and and it was always sort of messy and so on. And we seem to have got to a different space recently, where we're kind of sharing stuff a lot more, and we're not pushing the division so much. And I think Australia's got a different formation of this anyway, because we've never had a strong theoretical linguistics kind of for itself, right? A lot of what we might call kind of more theoretical linguistics in Australia is more, it's still more empirical. And, a lot of work, for example, on indigenous languages, right? So those people are maybe interested in kind of, theoretical aspects of linguistics drawn from that, but they're often also field linguists, right? And so they also work on language preservation and language rights for indigenous people, and so they're kind of a bit applied at another end, right? And we've sort of, and it may be an odd accident that it's one of these, the stupid things we're doing with research assessment. But a few years ago, it was about 5 years ago, they put us all together and said, okay, you're all, as far as the government is concerned, you're all linguists, right? And we're all saying, oh, wait a minute, we've got all these, we're all different. And they said, no, you're all linguists, right? And the applied linguists got together and said, oh, what are we going to do? We haven't got a classification. We're all called linguists. And we were kind of worried. And then when we went through the process, I thought, actually, I don't think it's our problem, right? Because the linguists are saying, like, what do you mean you're all linguists too? And I say, yes, sorry, we're all linguists, and so we've actually kind of, and one thing we've done over the last few years too is, because we have an Australian Applied Linguistics Association and conference and a linguistics, and we've actually been putting them together, so they overlap for a day or so, and we say, okay, they don't have to overlap completely. We'll have a day when they overlap. Right, because actually we've got shared interests, right, and so we've had a kind of coming together that's been quite useful. I mean, I'm quite positive about it now, and I'm finding, I'm so over those arguments, right, about applied and theoretical. But I think we've been lucky the way that's been working for us, and I know it's a big problem in other places, and I think to me the issue is in part that. When you look at the areas we have, it's the same with social linguistics, right? We shouldn't have to have social linguistics. We shouldn't need it, right? If any decent linguistics would be social, right? And any decent linguistics should also have kind of an applied aspect, and not, I mean, I did suffer years ago when we had a head of department who, and he wrote this description saying linguistics is the scientific study of language in all its aspects, and applied linguistics is the application of that knowledge to different contexts. Wow. And we said, no, we don't accept this. The whole thing is scientific, everything, and we just apply it. And he said, well, you're called applied linguists. I guess that's what you do, right? And so we've had that kind of difficult relationship. And I think now we've said, no, clearly applied linguists do kind of theoretical work and work in a different domain, and and we can sort of balance that relationship. And I think, if we hadn't had these really problematic divisions that started, and I've been reading up on that more recently, particularly because I'm working a lot more around social linguistics. And when you go back to these moments where Hymes and the other workers in the 70s, 60s to 70s, like Leboeuf and Hymes and so on, we're having to kind of work out, okay, what are we going to do? Like, all this money is going into theoretical linguistics. What decision do we make? Right? And I was interested if you've got competence and performance, right, coming out of Chomsky and linguistics. And do you then, the one way to go is say, okay, no, that's a stupid distinction, competence, don't go near it, right? Or do you say what Hymes did, say, no, okay, if you want competence, then we've got communicative competence.
Okay.
Right? And so then they develop communicative competence, and that, that has a whole area, it goes through applied linguistics, language teaching, all sorts of stuff. Everyone talks like communicative competence. But sometimes you think, oh, I wish we hadn't gone that way. If we hadn't, do we have to have competence as an idea? And that was, it was sort of a tactical decision in, 1970 something, when Hymes decided, okay, I'll go that route, right? And it got taken up, right? But and I think it's interesting to look back at where things got split, and I think that they're coming back together in some ways. I mean, the other split from that period, right, is the social linguistics and linguistic anthropology split.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people don't kind of appreciate that. But when you kind of look at social linguistics, and it kind of says, oh no, we don't do culture. Not culture. And so culture was it was split off to linguistic anthropology. And now we're seeing, some of those people who came through that, and there are actually people like Monica Heller, and then there's others who are more linguistic anthropology, Kira Hall, Mary Buchholz, people like that in the States, right?
Okay.
And they've been writing about that, saying, well, actually, maybe we're coming back together. And so you've got people like Jan Blommet now. See, Blommet comes out of an anthropological, he was an Africanist, looking at African languages in Tanzania.
Okay.
And he's very much linguistic anthropology, right? But that's now become, I wouldn't call it mainstream, because, it's, I guess what the new social linguistics is doing is a fairly different kind of social linguistics, but he's, that new stuff is happening. And it's sort of a bringing together, I think, of the cultural and social traditions, right? So I think some of those splits are shifting. And I think it seemed to me, because some of these theoretical linguistics, I guess I don't know enough and read enough, but it seems to run out of steam a bit. I mean, I know they've got, 20 different ways of doing grammar and whatever, but, it seems like the whole Chomskyan thing, you think, okay, it's like enough. There's that great paper by Nick Evans and Levinson, right? That kind of said, okay, universal really doesn't work. There are no universals, and these are people who've done very strong empirical linguistics for 30 years. Right? Saying, actually, no, it doesn't work. Right? And I thought, yeah, okay, that's it. It's over. Okay. That project's done, right? And I kind of think, okay, then maybe we're moving to a new era where we can do something different. But yeah, the divide between applied, and that divide has a very negative effect, I think, for applied linguistics, right? Because people often think, oh, well, that's very theoretical.
Yeah.
We're applied. So no. We have to have theories to be applied, right?
Sure,
and if we're applied linguists, it's because we're dealing with real world contexts, and I don't like a lot of these phrases, right? But then, well, we've got to have theories of society, we've got to have theories of education, we've got to, we have to work theoretically. And if you end up in that position saying, oh, we're all applied, therefore, we're not going to engage with theory, I think it's a real problem for us, right? So I agree. I think it's a major. It's just a, and it's a sad division, and it's unproductive, and and sometimes because my partner's basically a linguist, and and she says, well, you call yourself an applied linguist, like what do you think we could think? Of course we think you apply linguistics. That's what you're called, right? I said, no, we don't apply linguistics, right? She said, why did you call yourselves that? And I said, kind of not a great title, is it? And that's why like Spolsky and people have said, no, let's call it educational linguistics, and have those sort of educational, social, other things rather than calling it applied, right?
That's not
anyway, yes, that's a long answer to that question.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing. And I asked you that question because it's related to the second one. Here in Brazil, there's been quite a lot of discussion regarding whether linguistics is a science, in the positive sense. And Professor Rajagopalan went to Brasilia 3 months ago. We had a huge auditorium full of people, and he started talking about that, and he gave his opinion about that. He pointed out that this concept of, having this box-like science and linguistics inside, and we have all these methodology and things to work on, it's outdated. It doesn't permit us to think out of the box and, see the world as it is now. So this is a problem that camouflages the real problems we have in society. So what do you think of this? Do you think that critical applied linguistics is considered a science in this sense, or
no
way?
I mean, I know I agree with Rajagopalan. I mean, that problem. I mean, and again, it's interesting to look back historically, right? And when you look at the formation of linguistics, really around so beginning of the 20th century, and the need then to say, okay, we want to establish a discipline, a disciplined study of language, which isn't literary. It isn't about kind of kind of speculative. This is serious academic work, and the move then is to say, no, it's a science. Right, we're going to call it a science, and we're going to make it scientific, right? And of course, it's a good strategic move, right? It creates science as a very serious discipline, and we benefit from that in a way of having, a tradition that says it's scientific. But we get a lot of problems with that, right? Because then you get all the stuff that goes with the science of strict methodology, and again, as Rajan says, like the boxes, right? This is it. Not this, and that was Sosua's move, okay? And and Sosua said, look, of course I know language is social, political, economic, historical, but we're gonna drop all those, right? Yeah. Forget society, forget we're not going to do diachronic, forget history. It's synchronic studies of language, and so it's that move to bracket everything away, and it's again, it's a strategic move. And it's brought us benefits, but it's highly problematic. And I think Rajan's right too. I mean, there's been such a shift particularly across social sciences, to say, like we need to kind of open this up and stop sitting in these boxes. And obviously, being interdisciplinary, drawing on different areas. And I think as long as I mean, I always recall one of Foucault's questions was something like, what kinds of knowledge do we exclude in the moment we ask, is it a science, right? And I thought, we exclude lots of stuff, and I do see that the kind of force, not necessarily critical, but sort of other changes in kind of new social linguistics and so on are really challenging that and saying, we don't have to carry the scientific label anymore to be legitimate. Intellectuals. And I think, I mean, we still have that challenge to say, okay, on what grounds are we doing good work? How do we know this is good academic work? And we have to face up to that. But I don't think necessarily having to say it's a science answers that question.
It's at least in Brazil, we have the impression that some people, they kind of worship their own nail. So we are kind of in this nail worship tsunami in Brazil because we are scientists, you're not scientists, and that's very interesting. That's one of the things we are facing now. We are working on now. We are trying to write papers about this in Brazil and so on. Okay, thank you. Another question. I don't know if have you heard of the myth of Sisyphus? I try to make a contextualization.
Yes.
Yeah, and it has to do with he was condemned because of his misbehavior. He was condemned to roll a large stone to the top of a hill. When he got there, the stone was down again, and he had to do the same thing. Do you think we're living this in linguistics today? We're kind of condemned to repeat things, and we don't progress much.
In linguistics?
In terms of research.
In linguistics or in...
yeah, because there's been some discussion here. Sometimes we get together and we say, no, we kind of, you know, our researchers, we're doing the same thing again. You know, we just, you know, pick a very specific aspect of something we've already done, and we don't, you know, we don't go further. We're just describing and working on the same things over and over again. So, what do you think? Do you think we are kind of living this myth of Sisyphus in the world, or is it just something we see in Brazil? If you happen to know, what do you think?
Oh no, I would think Brazil is very similar to many places, right? I mean, I don't know if the Sisyphus story quite works for me as a metaphor. I mean, why? Because you know, it's as if it's. I mean, I agree that we have this problem, right? That we are sort of constantly pushing, you know, I mean, constantly trying to explore something and not, you know, and it goes up and falls back and so on. But I mean, yes, in a way. But the problem is that well, the issue is for us to, and maybe that is your point, right? Is to get outside the framework, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
to say, okay, like what are the issues? And it isn't this rock. So it's maybe just to walk away from the rock and say, okay, you know, you can go and let's look for some other rock to push, right? Whether that. So yeah, I mean, I agree. I think we're sort of at times, and particularly in areas of linguistics, you know, you kind of going on and on and on pursuing stuff. And you think, oh, so what actually is the point? And it's probably it's a good criticism for a lot of academic work. You know, we have to kind of say, yeah, what is useful here, and why are we doing this stuff? And it's not always clear, I think, of what the point of a lot of work is, right? Unfortunately. So yeah, I'm not the Sisyphus. I can see, I can see why it fits a negative image of what we do. Right? Yeah,
because you know, here in Brazil, you know, we have this. Even the government, when it comes to, you know, giving money for our research, some other areas like mathematics, physics, economics, engineering, they receive a lot of money. When it comes to humanities, linguistics, and we have lots of problems with these. And when we write a project, when we submit a project, they answer us back and say, no, what you're proposing is already done, or it's just you're just trying to do something a bit different, but it's already done. You know, so and then we have this impression that we are, you know, rolling the stone up to the top, and then when you get there, the stone is down, and we have to do again. And you know, this is the feeling we have here in Brazil.
But that question of being already done is interesting, isn't it? Because it's not to me a critique that is so obvious or common. I mean, it may be a different problem, but I wouldn't have thought was Brazil now. I mean, I think a real difficulty for academics around the world, and particularly in less well-resourced contexts, and I think Brazil is in a reasonable condition now. I mean, but you know, I think the real, you know, when I talk sometimes, you know, we're talking about kind of publishing and, you know, people, you know, the problem of getting published in all the journals and that sort of thing, and you know, and there's a lot of issues, of course, you know, because English is such a dominant language, and you know, that's enough of a big problem to start with, but it's the access to knowledge that I think is also the crucial one. And I see it particularly, you know, in the region I kind of work more with, say in the Philippines or Bangladesh and so on. And you think, yeah, people just don't have access to journals, don't have access, you know, and I think it's also just they're not part of those conversations, which you know, if you're reviewing articles, you're going to the right conferences, and you kind of get to say, okay, this is what the current argument is. This is what we're talking about now, right? And that's where the difficulty often is. And, you know, we see the same when you get, you know, applications to do doctoral work, you know, and you think, no, that's old. We've done that, right? And yeah, there is that sense that it's, I mean, whether we're actually doing new work, but just calling it something different is another question. But I think it's, I mean, it's interesting you're saying that's a common cause for rejection, you know, that we've already done this, because I don't personally seem to see that so often. And maybe it's an advantage of being in those contexts where I have the resources, I know kind of what's going on, and therefore, it's you may get you get critiqued for other things, and, like it's obscure, it's not well done, it's like it's not a question worth asking, but not so often it's already been done. So I'm kind of intrigued by that. I'm not quite sure what that would be about, right?
That's interesting. Okay, let's move forward. My fourth question, I paraphrased first verses of the Bible when I made a joke here saying in the beginning linguistics was created as a field of studies, then applied linguistics emerged, and afterwards Pennycook coins the term critical applied linguistics, and everyone thought that it was very good. So my question is, was your proposal of a critical approach to applied linguistics needed in order to explain other linguistic domains that existing theories could not explain or still cannot explain? That's a very promising question, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that was struck when I read that, when you said everyone saw that it was very good, first thing is that they didn't. I mean, there's been a lot of the kind of battle with the idea of critical applied linguistics, and a lot of people really didn't like it, and it was quite a long fight to kind of get a sense of it being a worthwhile idea, and that was it. Also, kind of there've been those long debates also around critical discourse analysis and so on, and then critical pedagogy, and and they've gone on for a long time about can we have an approach to discourse analysis that is critical, because then it's not analysis, it's interpretation, and this is Widdowson's argument, and the argument that you're therefore bringing your own prejudices to the analysis before you actually do the analysis, and which is a particular issue, I guess, for discourse analysis. But I mean, to me, the just naming critical. I mean, I named critical applied linguistics because I was reading all the stuff in critical pedagogy and critical discourse analysis, and I thought, how come we don't have a critical applied linguistics?
Yeah.
And I think it. Yeah, I mean, it enables certain, it sort of frees people up to do certain things, I think. And I mean, one of the things I learned quite early, I think, after I started writing about critical applied linguistics, and as people were saying, this is the people who kind of did like it and said, this is really useful, or at least some of the work, and I thought, well, yeah, and the point is, it's not that. I mean, I thought from my own history, right, in a way where I used to be very divided, like I think a lot of people. So I was working years ago in China, and I was teaching, second language development on the one hand, and on the other hand, sort of engaging in a much more radical politics, right? But they were separate. You've got a sort of political world and an applied linguistic world. And it was when I was studying with we were lucky because we had a very interesting group when I was doing my doctorate. So I was working with. Hang on, hold on one second. My partner's just come home. Hi, it's me. I'm just on Skype. Yeah. Okay. So we were working with this group. There was Bonnie Norton, Ruko Kubota, Angel Lin. I mean, all those people. Brian Morgan. We were all together at the same time, and we sort of started saying, okay, how do we bring in critical work into our field? And I think what also struck me was by naming it, it's not that sort of convinces people to do it in a way. It gives people the framework to say, oh yeah, okay, so it's possible to link a political or an ethical vision with an applied linguistic agenda, right? And it's not that it's just that it didn't always seem possible. So it sort of creates the conditions of possibility to do that by saying, this is a legitimate framework for thinking about your different domains of work in applied linguistics. So in a sense, it's not sort of new in a way. It's like just sort of saying it names the legitimate activity. So yeah, I think the naming was quite important, and then putting it out there with critical pedagogy, critical discourse, and critical literacy. Lots of other critical everything, right? So but it put it alongside those to say, hey, we can also take this up now as a similar project, right?
Yeah, that's it. So this idea, going to this idea of the term critical, it's a very controversial term sometimes, I remember I was reading one of these guys, Reinhard Koselleck. He's a German historian, and he talks about being critical, and he always associates being critical with a crisis. I just jumped to question 8, right? So what do you think? What does being critical has to do in your mind, in terms when we think about power disparity and transformation? And so what's the real thing today? Because, you wrote your book in 25 years ago, and has anything changed in this concept of criticality? What do you think? So, I just joined to question 5 and 8.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't tie the idea of critical to a crisis. And it's where I differ in a way from the more materialist or what I call more infrastructural arguments from a more classic Marxist position. I mean, it's not that I dismiss that, but I see them as, I don't see them as necessarily coupled. So I think we're getting a lot of interesting work emerging now critiquing neoliberalism, right? And then, the argument sort of is, well, we're all faced by, the problems of neoliberalism, and therefore there's a lot of work happening around it. And of course, that seems to make quite good sense. But I don't think it's clear that in a way that's driving some of that work. I mean, obviously, the work on neoliberalism is being pushed by neoliberalism, but it also creates its own crisis in a way. I mean, it's not sort of that people are in a real crisis in their own context, at least, that is producing that. So I don't link it so much to a crisis. I mean, obviously a crisis can bring it about, and obviously certain conditions bring it about. But I mean, to me, that notion of the critical is the I mean, the important thing is distinguishing between those different versions of what counts as critical, right? And there's the critical thinking and the kind of objective critical distance and that sort of thing, and the position I was trying to establish, and that goes across all the critical discourse analysis and critical literacy and so on. Well, most of it derives from that critical theory and a much more politicized position that takes an a priori position on power and inequality and so on. It says, no, that's where we're coming from. It's not a position of critical distance. It's a position of critical engagement or something, right? And that can be really quite a big difference, right? And I was looking at a book the other day that was about kind of language education, critical perspectives. I thought, yeah, okay, critical perspectives. Well, it wasn't clear. It was an okay book, but the critical was just a kind of being critical about education, something like that. And I thought, okay, I don't quite get. It's not a grounded criticality in a kind of political project, right? It's just a general critique, right? And I think those distinctions are important to make. I think, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, and I wrote another metaphor here, which is related to the Mobius strip. I don't know if you've heard of it, the Mobius strip or the Mobius band, which is used in mathematics, but
yes, okay, yeah.
That's number 7 in my outline. And it's interesting because it illustrates the constant interaction, and then some research areas like in Brazil traditionally, sociology, anthropology, economics, science, or medical science, natural science, physics, and other areas, they they talk to each other very much. They interact a lot, and this dialogue is very profitable for them. It's as if they were in a constant Mobius band, Mobius strip. So they have no fear to transgress their own theories, their own points of views, their own ideas, and they transgress their boundaries and go beyond. Do you think that we haven't got that? We haven't reached this realm or this domain in linguistics so far? You know, we don't interact much. Do you think it's we're not in the Mobius strip yet?
I find it hard to compare the disciplines at times because I don't really know how much biology and physics and other things do actually interact with each other. But for us, I think, yeah, I mean, there has been this real boundary making and so on, and it's really important to work to break that down. Because one of the things I found really interesting is once you start to read whole areas of, like cultural geography, and you find there are these geographers, you think, oh, good Lord, they've got really interesting stuff to say about space, and it's also because you think, well, geographers are kind of, because you don't actually know what geographers do. You think, you kind of think high school geography, right? And then you read, feminist, critical, cultural geographers, and they, oh, okay, and they've got, fascinating, because they've been influenced, they're all quoting Foucault and, critical studies and so on too. And then you start to look at history and you start to look at anthropology, and there are all these sort of bits of those disciplines that are also informed by exactly the same stuff, right? And I think it's so rich, right? So I agree. I don't think we do draw on that stuff enough. And then quite a very limited set of things, right? Sociology will be this or this, and anthropology that. And there's a few kind of classic texts that get brought in, but I think there's certainly a lack of that drawing across those areas, and basically we should do as much as we can to encourage it, because there's such rich stuff to be drawn on. I mean, the difficulty then is working how it fits, right? Because people are talking from different disciplinary areas, and that can be quite different, right? And you think, okay, how do we actually make that? How do I understand what this geographer who's been talking about space and place for 20 years? How do I get inside that discourse to make it, to give it some sense? If I'm talking about language in place, and am I really understanding what's going on over there when I try and do that? And I think that can be quite hard, but it's rewarding, and I agree. I think we don't do a lot of that in our kind of areas, yeah. I mean, applied linguistics should be the kind of perfect place for that, and that's what I've argued a bit at other times, that applied, particularly critical applied linguistics, I say, one of the things it should be exactly good for is a kind of renewal of the discipline. Because if it is open, and if it is trying to draw on sociology, political science, anthropology, political economy, and so on, and that kind of then works into other disciplinary areas, then it should be the place that's changing what's going on in other areas of applied linguistics, as long as it gets read, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. But in my case personally, I see the need of establishing this conversation, because they have lots to contribute, and we do also have a lot to contribute to their areas as well. Okay.
Yeah, and some people have been very good. Like my colleague, a late colleague, he just died a month or so ago, Chris Candlin. I mean, Chris Candlin was very good at that, and his whole vision of applied linguistics was that it worked in that interface, but with professions and other disciplines. So Chris worked very much with, the medical faculty or the law faculty, and he would go right and talk to the head of clinical surgery or the head of this and that, and say, okay, how can we work together? And he would, and all that stuff on doctor-patient work and so on. I mean, Chris did all that by really, going and talking to people in other disciplines and saying, you may need us, and we've got a lot of stuff we can do with language, but we really want to talk to you, and let's work out a relationship. And so on that really quite practical applied level. Some people, I think, do really interesting work with that, and Chris Cannon was a good model of that, I think.
Okay, that's nice. That's nice. Yeah. This is something that personally I'm very much interested, because here in Brazil, it's, you know, because of this box thing in Brazil, box thing in science in Brazil, you know, it's not very well accepted in the academy, these transgressing boundaries. You know, if you belong to the theory, you have to stick to it. That's the. It's not. You know, it's something that it's implied in all the discourses and conferences and everywhere we go. So, but I think that this is very profitable, this, you know, conversation. Okay, Professor Alastair, you know, question 6, I saw that we live in a world that's very unstable and dynamic, right? And Bauman, you know, Giddens, Foucault, Bourdieu, and other sociologists and philosophers said, what challenges do you know, foresee is a very strong word, but what challenges do you think we're going to have in the future in such a mobile scenario for, you know, for critical applied linguistics? So that's if for one of your students who say, what do you think I should work on for the next years, you know, to contribute to the world in this?
Don't answer that one.
No.
I figure they've got to work that one out, right? But I think well, in a way, I mean, I think we see exactly the tensions around partly what I was trying to say before about whether theories and so on are driven, you know, to what extent we see them driven by real material conditions and so on. And I think there's an interesting tension appearing now, that we're seeing all this work going on, particularly in Europe, around superdiversity. Okay. Right, again, Blommet and Ben Rampton and so on, they're all saying, okay, superdiversity, right? And some of us kind of looking at that from the outside and saying, okay, yeah, okay, so what is this superdiversity, and why? You know, and it's very clear it's a result of mobility and changing migration patterns and so on. But the critical view on that started to emerge, and I mean, I've said a few things about that, and you know, particularly my colleague Simfrey McConey that I've written with, and looking from what's called a southern perspective, you know, an African perspective, saying, you know, look, you know, like, we've always had diversity. Like, just because you've now discovered diversity, there's no reason to particularly call it super diversity. This is just diversity. You know, this is normal, and it just happens to be now happening in Europe. So I'm not sure you know, don't start trying to map your super diversity back onto us. We've had it for a long time, right? And there was actually a colleague of mine in Australia said, well, you know, if they've got super diversity, I guess we've got hyper diversity. You know, and say, you know, so I think that's where you see one of those interesting tensions. That clearly the increased mobility of people and, you know, and that big migration, particularly to Europe, but also to other parts of the world, is creating a range of new issues that have quite major linguistic dimensions, right, in terms of what's going on in new cities and in work and in education. And that's clearly driving a kind of new agenda, but also driving a new critique about how we frame that, right? Obviously, I mean, environmental issues are huge. I'm never quite convinced of what the linguistic, I mean, apart from the environmental issues may increasingly drive greater migration and have other, you know, just link back into that, whether there are applied linguistic issues coming out of those contexts, I'm not too sure. The other obvious thing that's changing what's going on is the whole domain of the internet, and, you know, online communication, texting, Facebook, and so on, and that's fast and changing and quite dynamic, and linguistically what's going on there is quite fascinating, right? And there's all sorts of stuff, you know, so it's kind of looking at what young people are doing now with language, and how they're kind of integrating, you know, I mean, multimodal, you know, we were all getting excited about multimodality, and you think, oh, you know, it's so obvious now, right? It's, you know, I mean, and so we're in that sort of in that fast-changing environment where it's getting kind of hard to keep up with those changes. But they're the sort of typical changes I think we're seeing happening. I mean, in the broader world, I mean, I'm always intrigued because I also work in the kind of global Englishes stuff. And clearly, as you start to map that, I mean, one, there's the different arguments about how we frame that, but we're also seeing that big picture of a changing world with the rise of China.
Okay.
And, and China and Chinese then starts to present a rather different picture about, what dominant languages are and who's learning what and so on. And it's not quite clear where that'll go, and that's sort of quite interesting in various ways, right? And you can see quite clearly that changes in political, economic power change, the big global language dynamics. But English is so embedded in a lot of systems that it's not quite clear what will happen to all of that, and it's not evident, I think. So there would be the sort of the shifts. But I think at the same time, my other point is that it's not always that our work responds only to those shifts, right? That in fact there are different academic changes that also respond, or happen in relationship to that, but not dependent on it. So I think there are other changing ways we think about social life, about humans. I mean, I'm kind of reading up on that more recently, trying to think about what does it mean to be human, and changes in relationship to humans and animals, humans and the environment, humans and objects. And that's a sort of, I don't know if that's necessarily driven by real world changes. It's driven by a kind of changing shift in philosophical, theoretical ideas that can shift the way we think about all sorts of stuff. And that's got big implications for language, I think. So,
okay, thank you very much.
So yeah, and you asked about the Bauman and Giddens and Foucault and Bourdieu, and they still have a lot of credibility, I think, and they said a lot of very useful stuff, and it's still being used. So it's hard to know who's next. Which people can get taken up next. They still have a lot of standing, I think.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting for me. I've actually been going back, as I said, in the social linguistic literature more, and reading back to Gumperz and Leboeuf and Hymes, and thinking, actually, it's a very interesting period. I actually need to understand that better as well in order to understand where things are going, right? Because it's easy to sort of think, okay, that was all history, and it was a very interesting period, I think, in the like late 60s, early 70s, when social linguistics really got going.
So they
and they have, I think they also have there's a lot of value to look at what they said. Yeah.
Okay. So going back to them might give us a
sorry, yes, go on. I think I think
going back to them may give us.
I think another thing worth thinking about it, and it goes. I think another important aspect to this, and it goes particularly to some issues in Brazil, I think, that it's also that if you look at applied linguistics, and there has been some mapping of this now, right? That because it was partly tied to English language teaching, and it still remains so, but as it's grown and developed and sort of got more embedded in different places around the world, and although it operates predominantly in English, and in a lot of domains, and that for a lot of people, say from Brazil who want to go and do a PhD, it's still fairly common maybe to go and do it elsewhere, to the States, to Britain, and so on, and then you kind of read that same list of people who are the well-known people and so on. At the same time, you've also got people growing up in developing in these contexts, and I'm thinking of a kind of good friend of mine, Lim Mario de Souza, right? Now, if you look at Lim Mario's work, and it's also because he also worked in post-colonial theory. He comes out of a different theoretical grounding, and he's then drawing on very different work from the standard applied linguistics work, right? And drawing on and he is reading like Walter Mignolo, the kind of big Spanish or the Argentinian based in the States, but Mignolo reads a lot of the Spanish work, right? And then Paulo reads that, and over time, some of that work that's coming out from Brazil and from Latin America, and theorists like Dussel and so on, sort of, it takes a time, but they're sort of emerging a bit because you've got people like Lin Mario, Luis Paulo, people like that, you know, talking internationally, bringing up different work. And I think, okay, then there is a sort of a feed-in of different theorists. You've got, you know, different people kind of coming from India, you know, and other, you know, people like Sinfrey Makoni saying, well, we should be reading this person. You know, okay, you know, it's not, this is out of the mainstream canon. And you realize there is all this other work that's often being submerged because of what we see as the canon of applied linguistics and because of the languages that people do it in. But once you have bilingual applied linguists who are reading Portuguese or reading Spanish or reading Japanese or Indian languages and then saying, you know, this stuff is really interesting and then writing in English, then you get that whole crossover, and that's a real sort of renewal, I think, for the field. And it really shifts, you know, as it starts to get taken up, it's changing kind of the pattern of what becomes important, right? Rather than that canon of the kind of Anglo writers or their translations, you know, in terms of Bourdieu and Foucault and so on.
That's it. That's interesting. Okay. Well, question 9 is a game. It's a language game. How do you describe Pennycook by Alastair and Pennycook by Pennycook and Pennycook by the Critical Applied Linguist?
I'm not sure I understood the question.
I mean, I try to. We sometimes do this in Brazil here. You know, how would you describe yourself? I mean, the Pennycook, the professor, by Pennycook, by Alastair. You know, the man, the husband, the father, and do you think it interferes? One thing interferes in the other. You know, or you manage to make this separation, and what I do in my private life, you know, what Alastair does is different from Pennycook professor, and it's different from Pennycook the linguistic, or what do you think, you know?
Well, I think, in part, but because when I was talking before about that integration of aspects of a kind of personal and political life, maybe the academic life, I don't find those things are very divided. But in fact, I mean, you know, I mean, maybe on the other hand, that's because I work too much and spend too much of my time doing my academic work and don't do enough outside work. Right? I mean, you know, we get obsessed by our work, right? But but I find that a lot of that crosses over very easily, and that, you know, when you start as you're doing something else, always kind of thinking, oh, that would be interesting. Oh, there's an interesting example, and I must talk to that person, or I'll write this down, and you know, and this sort of your kind of daily life kind of becomes also this constant thinking about that. So I don't see a great divide, right? And it's sort of, I mean, you clearly need to switch off and do other stuff at times, and I do have other things I do in life. But yeah, I don't find a kind of big, I don't find it's a big division, and I think, and also I don't think in, you know, in the way I mean, I know, I guess I have that status in my institution as a professor, but I tend to kind of see it, you know, I'm sure, I know other people don't see it that way, right? Because I know my students, even my doctoral students saying, oh, you know, we were, you know, they're saying, oh, you know, they were terrified before. I said, what do you mean terrified? I mean, it's just me, right? And they say, yeah, but yes, but, you know, and we don't see how we're seen, right? And it's hard to appreciate that, because I think, look, it's just me. I just, you know, these are the clothes I wear. I'm just relaxed. You know, we'll just talk about the research, right? And so to me, there's never a big division. I don't kind of dress up. I don't wear particularly different clothes when I'm at work, or when I'm not, or when I'm doing stuff. I kind of walk to work. You know, to me, it's fairly integrated. But I'm aware that, you know, of course, that's not how others see me, because you nevertheless have an institutional and a bigger reputation that it gets in the way of that, I suppose. Yeah. But I see it as fairly much the same kind of thing. I don't. Good.
That was the objective, to get these answers right. So to end this up, if you want to answer that, if you want to answer that, if you want to be honest, this interview was for you. What do you think? If you want to answer that, huh?
Yeah, that was very interesting. Thank you.
Interesting. Okay.
Yes. It was interesting. Yeah, I enjoyed this. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I probably should have prepared more. I just had a busy day. I got this late, and I was running around trying to get my Skype to work. So and so maybe we can also I can think about it some more, and we can also email a bit and discuss it if you want to.
Sure.
I can probably think more about some of these questions.
Sure. So that was my suggestion. If you want, that would be very nice to to broaden this discussion and maybe rephrase some things. Because as I said to you, if you allow us, I'm going to send the formal invitation, but the idea is to write a book. We want to invite Kubota, Norton, Kanagaraja, Rajagopalan, and some
all my friends.
Yeah, and some people from Brazil. We want to write about studies, critical studies in Brazil and all over the world. That's our objective. So this interview is the starting point. So we will be talking, and if you want to broaden it, and so on. It was very nice. It was very interesting. We did talk about what I was expecting to talk about. That was nice. Thank you very much. Very much for that. Right. And we hope to see you in my case in October, because I won't be able to go to Campo Grande. But in October, we've been working hard to have the conference in Brasilia. That's going to be a nice time to be together with you.
Yeah, so that should be very interesting. So,
thank you very much, Alastair, and have a very nice evening. In my case, day.
Day.
Okay.
Okay.
See you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye. Bye.